The sky above Mars Colony 12 turned strange kind of red that evening as the dust storms began to slow and the sun sank low behind the metal hills of the mining outpost. The wind howled like it always did, but there was something new in the air, something sharp and burning and fast. Joe sat on his porch sipping warm water from a dented metal cup and watching the dust when he saw the flash. It was not lightning, it was not a flare, it was something falling from space, something wrapped in fire and smoke. It came down hard beyond the east ridge and shook the ground like a small quake, and the lights inside Joe's shack flickered. Joe stood up, grabbed his old breathing mask, and walked toward the crash, because old soldiers never ignore strange things falling from the sky. He moved slow but steady through the dust, with the wind slapping his coat and the sound of his boots crunching over red rocks and metal scrap. The crater was fresh and hot, and steam rose from the center where something silver and broken lay cracked open like a crushed egg. Joe stepped closer, his hand near his tool belt, where he kept a small knife and a flare gun just in case. Inside the pod was a body small and still curled up against the heat shield and glowing faint blue in the dim light. It was not human. It was a girl, or something like a girl, with silver skin and long hair like strands of white fire and deep glowing eyes half open and watching him with fear. She was bleeding. Not red blood, but glowing blue liquid that hissed as it hit the hot metal floor. Joe took a step back, looked around, and then stepped in. He had seen things before in the war, but never anything like this. He lifted her gently, surprised at how light she was and how cold her skin felt against his gloves. She whispered something in a voice like wind through glass, but he could not understand the words. Joe did not ask questions. He just carried her out, wrapped her in his coat, and began to walk back through the rising wind and falling night. Back at the shack, Joe laid her on his workbench, cleared of tools and covered in old blankets. He ran a scanner over her body and watched the readings flicker and spark as the machine tried to make sense of her strange alien biology. Her breathing was slow and weak, her pulse flickered like a fading light. Joe gave her water through a dropper and added heat to the room until the cold began to leave her skin. Still, she did not speak again. She just watched him with eyes that looked both old and young and scared. He sent a message to the colony med bay and waited for the reply. It came quick and cold. "We do not treat enemy life forms," was the answer. "Destroy the pod and report the location. Do not engage. Let it die." Joe stared at the screen for a long time, then turned it off. He looked at the girl, then at the rifle hanging on his wall, then back at the girl again. He knew what the colony wanted. He had followed orders once long ago and lost too much. Not again. He sat beside her, cleaned her wounds with soft cloth and humming hands. She winced and gasped, but did not pull away. When she slept, Joe looked at the stars through the dusty window and thought about Earth and the war and the things he saw and did. He thought about choices. He thought about kindness. The next morning, Joe walked into town and bought supplies, food, medical gel, extra water, and blankets. The clerk asked what it was all for. Joe said nothing, just grunted and left. People watched him more than usual. Whispers followed him as he walked. He knew someone had seen the crash or the smoke, or maybe even him carrying the girl. The colony did not like secrets. The colony liked rules. Joe returned to find her sitting up, weak and shaking but alive. She looked at him with those glowing eyes and whispered again, softer this time. A nay, maybe, or a plea. He did not know the words, but he nodded anyway and brought her warm broth in a cup. She tried to drink, spilled some, smiled a little. He smiled too. Then he locked the door. Far above Mars, in the dark sky of space, a ship watched with cold eyes. The signal from the escape pod had reached it, and the crew was already moving. They had come to find her. They would not leave empty-handed. But on the ground, an old soldier had made a choice. And choices like that could change everything. Joe sat by the small fire inside his bunker while the girl rested under thick blankets on the cot across from him. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional distant whine of the colony's power turbines spinning in the cold Martian wind. She had not spoken much since waking, but her eyes never left Joe's face, and he could see the fear still sitting behind those bright glowing lights. Joe cooked some dried root stew in a metal pot, stirring it with slow, steady hands while watching her from the corner of his eye. She moved like she was in pain, every breath tight, every limb shaking. He had seen wounded soldiers before, but never anything like this. Her skin had changed slightly since the night before, shifting from pale silver to a deeper blue, as if reacting to earth food, or maybe just healing. She tried to sit up again and almost fell over, so Joe walked over and helped her sit against the wall with pillows stacked behind her. She whispered something again, the same soft sound as before, a name maybe, or a word from her language. Joe shook his head gently and pointed at himself. "Joe," he said, then pointed at her and raised an eyebrow. She hesitated, then spoke one word slowly, clearly, "Lyra." Her voice was soft like the wind on sand, but also heavy like it carried too much weight. Joe repeated it with a nod, "Lyra." She gave a small smile, and that made something warm move in Joe's chest. He had not smiled in years, not really. War had taken many things, and peace had been quiet and empty until now. The days passed slow but full. Lyra healed slowly, but each day she grew stronger. She began to learn simple words from Joe. Water, food, sleep, help, danger. He spoke little, but showed her, through actions, what the words meant. She watched and copied and smiled more often. Joe taught her how to hide from the colony sensors, how to stay low and quiet. He added extra shielding to the bunker walls and built a decoy signal to mask her presence. He told no one, not even the old comms officer he used to drink with. Secrets were safer alone. One afternoon, as a dust storm raged outside, Lyra traced patterns on the wall with a stick and then turned to Joe with serious eyes. She drew 3 shapes in the sand on the floor. One looked like a star, one like a crown, and one like a broken sword. Joe sat down beside her and watched as she pointed to the crown, then to herself. Joe frowned. She nodded again. She drew a circle around the crown, then slashed it with the stick. She was trying to say something. He looked at her and asked softly, "Princess." She nodded slowly, and her hand trembled slightly. Joe leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a long time. A princess. Not just any alien girl, but a royal one. That explained the ship that fell. That explained the tech in her blood. That explained the fear in her eyes. He understood now why someone had tried to kill her. Someone powerful. Someone close. Lyra tapped the floor and drew another symbol. A tall figure with many arms and a crown of flame. She pointed at it with hate in her eyes. Then at the broken sword again. Betrayal. That was what she meant. Someone she trusted had tried to end her. Joe looked at her and said one word again. "Brother." She froze, then nodded once. That night Joe sent a message to an old contact on the Outer Rim. Encrypted. Short. He asked about alien royalty and recent political shifts in known enemy empires. The reply came hours later. A royal scandal. A lost heir. A rumor of exile. A massive purge on a moon base near the Nabari belt. No survivors, they had said, but someone had survived. Lyra, the princess they left to die. Joe sat in the dark, holding his head in his hands. He was just a farmer now. Just a tired old man who wanted peace. And now he was hiding the most wanted girl in the galaxy. And still he did not call Earth Command. Still he said nothing to the colony. In the next days things got harder. Patrols increased. Drones scanned the area more often. Someone had noticed something. Joe taught Lyra how to use the escape tunnels, how to duck and run when the alarms blared. He gave her his spare mask, his spare knife, and showed her the back door through the cliffs. She learned faster than any human child. She was smart and quick and careful. One morning 3 men in black armor came to Joe's shack asking questions. They had no insignia, no names, only cold eyes and metal boots. They asked about the crash, about unusual signals, about energy spikes and missing tech. Joe said he saw nothing, just storms, just rocks. They searched anyway. They scanned the room. They scanned Joe, but they did not find Lyra. She was in the tunnels, listening through the wall, her hand on her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. After they left, Joe joined her below. She reached out and touched his shoulder gently. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. That night he took out his old rifle, cleaned it slowly, and set it by the door. Lyra sat beside him and looked at the stars through the vent screen. She pointed up, then touched her heart. She missed her home, even if her home had betrayed her. Joe understood that too well. He looked at her and said softly, "You are not alone anymore." She gave a small nod and leaned against his arm. For the first time in many years, Joe felt something good in his chest again. Hope maybe, or purpose. But far above Mars, in deep orbit, something moved. A black ship cloaked in silence. Its scanners reached through the red dust and found a faint signal. Faint but familiar. They had found her. And this time they were not coming to talk. The cold wind outside the bunker screamed louder than usual that night, as if the storm itself knew something terrible was about to come from the sky. Lyra stood near the small window, her glowing eyes staring out at the dark red dust swirling across the plains, while Joe checked the power cells one more time. He felt something in his bones, an old instinct from the war days, a pressure behind the silence, a stillness that warned of things hiding just beyond the light. That morning the colony was quiet, too quiet. No drills, no patrols, no market noise, only still eyes watching and hushed voices behind sealed doors. A large black ship had entered Mars orbit hours before. No transponder, no welcome call, no flight path. Just silence and presence. Joe received a message from Alina, a young medic he had met once during a supply run weeks ago. She was smart, kind, and curious, and had always asked about the strange power spikes near Joe's farm. The message was short. "They are here. They are not human. Be careful." Joe read it twice, then deleted it, and looked over at Lyra, who was watching him closely. She could feel it too, the pull of danger, the shadow of something old and cruel creeping toward her through space and dust. That night just after sunset, a strange hum filled the sky. Low, steady, and deep. Joe stepped outside with his old rifle strapped to his back and looked up. He saw the ship hanging above the eastern ridge, dark as coal and wide as a city block. No lights, no windows, no noise. Just there. A small shuttle broke from the belly of the ship and landed near the colony gates. The council met in secret. No broadcast. No public announcement. No questions allowed. Joe knew this was no diplomatic visit. These were hunters, not guests. Later that evening, Joe opened the trapdoor and helped Lyra climb down into the deepest part of the bunker. He gave her food, water, a small light, and the old pistol he had once used during the last Martian rebellion. She looked at him and touched his hand gently. She did not need words. Her eyes said it all. "Thank you. Be safe." Joe climbed back up, locked the door, and sat with his rifle near the front entrance, listening to the wind and the soft tick of the heater. Hours passed. Then came the knock. 3 sharp hits against the metal door. Not loud, not angry, just certain. Joe opened the door with the rifle still in hand and looked into the face of something ancient and cold. The figure was tall, over 7 feet, wrapped in dark armor that shimmered like oil under light. Its face was hidden behind a black mask with red lines running down the sides, and its voice came through a translator in a cold, deep tone. "You are sheltering something that belongs to us." Joe said nothing, just stared. The figure took a step forward. "A fugitive escaped from the royal fleet. You will surrender her now." Joe's grip tightened on the rifle, but he did not raise it. "She is not yours to take," he said quietly. The figure tilted its head slightly. "She is property of the Empire, and you are interfering with a royal matter." Joe took a breath and answered, slow and calm. "She is a person, and she is under my roof. I do not give up people who come here bleeding and afraid." The figure paused, then turned to leave. "You have one day. After that we come without knocking." Then it vanished into the wind. Joe shut the door slowly and leaned against it, feeling the weight of that threat press into his bones. He looked down at the floor and whispered to himself, "We're out of time." The next morning the colony was different. Posters appeared on the walls showing a sketch of Lyra's face and warnings about harboring alien fugitives. The message was clear: turn her in or be punished. Drones flew low, scanning every home, every barn, every cave in the nearby ridges. Joe moved Lyra again deeper into the old mining tunnels that had not been used since the first settlement years ago. She wore a human coat and a mask and carried a small pack of supplies. They sat together in the tunnel under the weak light of a battery lamp. Lyra drew shapes in the dust again. She drew the ship. She drew the mask. She drew a single tear falling from the crown. Joe watched her, then asked softly, "Why do they want you so bad?" Lyra hesitated, then tapped her chest with one finger and drew a star around her hand. Not just royalty. Something else. Something in her. Something they feared. Joe understood enough. Back in the colony, people began to whisper. Some said Joe was working with aliens. Some said he was cursed. Others said he was protecting something the Empire wanted, and maybe it was time to ask why. Alina found Joe near the supply shack and walked with him in silence to the edge of the ridge. She handed him a sealed packet of medicine and a new battery cell. She also gave him a look of worry. "I don't know what you're doing, Joe, but you better know what they are." Joe nodded. He knew. He had seen death squads before. He had seen children shot for looking wrong. He had seen what empires do when they feel afraid. He would not let that happen again. Not to Lyra. That night the black ship opened again. This time it sent 6 small figures down into the colony. They moved fast. They had weapons. They knocked on doors and took people for questioning. Joe saw it through the scope of his rifle from the top of the ridge. He knew they would come for him next. He went back to the bunker and met Lyra at the tunnel mouth. "We are running now," he said. She nodded. Alina met them near the northern pass in an old rover covered in dust and hidden under cargo nets. She drove them through the rocks while drones passed overhead. No one spoke. The night was alive with fear. Lyra looked back once at the sky where a brother's ship waited like a silent god, ready to crush any who defied its will. But beside her were humans. Weak by Empire standards. Slow. Small. But they had something her people never understood. Heart. That night in the dark under Mars soil. The hunted princess was not alone. And the hunters would find their prey was no longer helpless. The rover moved through the canyons with its engine running low and silent as Alina steered it between jagged rocks and narrow paths. Joe sat beside her checking the scanner, while Lyra stayed low in the back covered in blankets and hidden under crates of scrap metal. The stars above were cold and distant, and the black ship in orbit had not moved since it arrived, but they all knew it was watching, waiting, listening. They had reached the northern border of the colony's limit, a place rarely visited and mostly forgotten. An old mining site abandoned years ago after the drills stopped working and the ground gave nothing but dust. Here they planned to hide, and here they began to think of something more than hiding. They needed to leave Mars. Alina parked the rover inside a half-collapsed hangar and shut off the engine. The wind outside screamed as it passed through broken beams and torn wires. Inside the air was thin and dry, but it was safe for now. Joe unfolded the map and laid it on a crate pointing to a small marker deep in the ridge. "There's an old transport ship here," he said, "buried under rock when the mines collapsed, but the engines are intact. It was built before the war, before the lockdowns. It has no auto beacons, no ID chip. It can fly without alerting the satellites if we can get it working." Alina looked at the map, then at Joe, and then at Lyra, who was now sitting up and listening closely. "You want to take her off-world?" she asked. Joe nodded. "There's nowhere left to hide on this planet. The Empire will not stop until they have her." Lyra looked at both of them, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small crystal glowing faint blue. She handed it to Joe and touched the ship symbol on the map. Joe understood. This was not just a key. It was a power source. They began that night, digging through rock with old tools, pulling metal beams and rusted plates away from the collapsed landing pad. The ship was there, buried but whole, long and narrow with twin engines and a wide cargo bay. Its name was still painted on the side, though covered in dust and rust. Hope Runner. It took them 3 nights to clear the entrance and 2 more to connect power. The ship hummed to life, weak but alive. The lights flickered. The engines pulsed. But they were not alone anymore. The black ship had sent scouts, small black drones that hovered like flies and moved like ghosts. One of them passed near the hangar and caught a glimpse of heat. It sent a signal and was destroyed a second later by Joe's rifle. But the signal had gone. They had little time left. Joe worked on the engine, while Alina handled the NAV system. Lyra stayed near the core chamber, syncing her crystal with the ship's AI. She spoke in her own language, and the ship responded. Ancient text speaking to ancient code. On the sixth night, they heard the roar. A shuttle had landed not far from the mining ridge, and figures in dark armor began to move through the rocks. The hunters had arrived again. Joe handed Alina the pistol and took the rifle to the roof of the hangar. He could see the shadows moving between the cliffs, fast and careful. He fired once, and the echo rolled through the night. Lyra grabbed the last battery cell and ran it to the engine chamber. She placed the crystal inside, and the ship groaned. The lights turned blue. The engines warmed. "We are ready," Alina shouted. Joe fired twice more, then climbed down and ran to the bay. Lyra was already inside, pulling levers and starting the sequence. Alina closed the ramp and locked the door. Outside, the hunters were at the gate, cutting through with burning tools. Inside the ship, the engines screamed and the ground shook. Joe sat in the pilot seat, while Lyra took the second chair. Alina held the weapon and watched the doors. The roof split open with a crash, and dust filled the cabin. Then the Hope Runner lifted. Up through fire and smoke and cutting lights. Up through the broken beams and red dust. Up through the night sky of Mars. The hunters fired. One shot hit the wing. Another grazed the side. But the ship did not stop. It climbed into the sky and punched through the clouds with a roar so loud it shook the mountains. The black ship above moved to intercept. But Lyra spoke to the AI, and the engines shifted course. The Hope Runner spun sideways and vanished behind the nearest moon. They were gone. Inside the ship, the air was still heavy with smoke and heat. Alina helped Joe out of the seat and checked the burns on his arm. Lyra sat silent, watching the stars on the screen as they moved through the dark. Joe looked at her and asked, "Where now?" She tapped the console and brought up a map. There was a place marked in green, deep in uncharted space. She pointed. A refuge. Maybe a rebel base. Maybe just silence. Joe nodded. "Then we go there." Alina sat beside them and opened a medkit. She smiled for the first time in days. "That was close," she said. Joe looked at her and grinned. "Too close." Lyra leaned back in her seat. She closed her eyes. Her home was gone. Her past broken. But now she had something she never expected. A chance. A voice in the dark. A place to begin again. Outside, the stars moved fast and quiet. And behind them, the Empire searched the dust for a princess who no longer waited to be saved. The stars outside the Hope Runner blinked one by one as the ship drifted into the edge of deep space, far from Mars, far from the black ship, far from the reach of the Empire. Inside the ship, the lights would dim, the engines quiet, the cabin warm, but still filled with tension, like a storm waiting just beyond the walls. Joe sat at the table in the small galley, watching steam rise from a cup of recycled water, while Alina patched a wire near the rear panel, with sparks flying and tools clanking. Lyra stood by the front window, her glowing eyes locked on the distant lights ahead, her hands wrapped around the metal railing, as if holding on to something fragile. They had escaped, but they all knew running could not last forever. Joe leaned back with a quiet sigh and looked at the girl who had become their mission, their secret, their burden, and maybe their only hope. He asked again what he had asked once before, this time, with no fear, no pressure, only care. "Why do they want you so badly?" Lyra turned slowly, walked toward the center of the cabin, then reached into her coat and pulled out something small and silver, a cube with strange lines that shifted when touched. She placed it on the table and tapped it once. A soft blue light rose into the air, forming a floating image of a world, not Earth, not Mars, but something darker, something covered in clouds and rings of debris. Then came faces. Not human. Not hers either. Old faces, wise, cruel, proud. And then one face filled the space. A young man, strong, with bright eyes and a crown that burned like fire. He looked like Lyra, but harder, colder, sharper. Her brother. She touched his image gently, then erased it with a swipe. She pointed to herself, then to him. Joe understood. He ruled. She did not. She was supposed to. Alina sat down across the table, staring at the cube as if it might explode. She asked softly, "What does he fear?" Lyra tapped the cube again, and the room filled with symbols. Ship diagrams, weapon maps, command codes. They glowed bright and strange. But the meaning was clear. Joe leaned forward slowly. "This is not just information. This is control." Lyra nodded. The cube held keys. Codes buried in her DNA. Commands that could disable fleets, stop drones, lock weapons. She had been created not just as a royal, but as a failsafe, in case the Empire fell into wrong hands. But the wrong hands came first. Her brother took the throne through fear and blood. He purged the council, silenced the elders, erased the peace treaty that had taken generations to form. And when Lyra spoke against him, he branded her a traitor and ordered her death. She escaped barely with the help of one loyal guard, who died buying her time. Her pod was not meant to land. It was meant to vanish. Joe stared at her hands, the same hands that had drawn stars in the dirt, the same hands that had fed a bird back at the colony. These hands could end wars. Alina spoke carefully. "Why come to us?" Lyra looked at her and answered in broken English. "Because you feel." Joe looked at her. "What do you mean?" She placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes, then pointed at him, then at Alina, then at the stars. "Humans fight. Yes, but humans choose." She had watched Earth for years through intercepted broadcasts, through secret satellites sent by quiet rebels who still dreamed of peace. She had seen humans cry when others were lost. She had seen humans risk their lives for strangers. She had seen something her people had forgotten: compassion. Alina leaned back slowly. "You came to us not to run, but to hope." Lyra nodded. Joe rubbed his chin deep in thought, then asked a question they both feared. "What happens if we use the codes?" Lyra stared at the floor for a long time, then looked up. The fleet stopped. The weapons shut down. The Empire falls. Alina blinked. "All of it." Lyra nodded again. Joe sighed. "Then it will not end there. Someone else will try to rise. They always do." Lyra pointed to the map again. "There are others, not loyal to the throne. They wait. They hide. But they wait. Rebels. Old council. Banned scientists. Exiles like her. If the codes reach them, they will rise." Joe stood up and paced across the room. The weight of it pressed down hard. He was a farmer, now not a soldier. He had walked away from war with broken bones and an emptier soul, and now he held the seed of another one. But this one might save more than it destroys. He looked at Lyra. "If we help you, we become targets forever." She looked at him with eyes full of sorrow. Then she whispered, "I know." Joe walked to the window, looked out into the cold, endless dark, and saw something small and bright in the distance. A signal buoy. Old. Floating near the edge of a dead zone. He turned back to Alina. "We need to send a message. Not just to Earth. To the colonies. To the outer belts. To anyone still listening." She opened the comm panel and powered it up. The screen buzzed to life. The antenna turned. Lyra stepped forward with the cube, placed it near the port, and tapped it 3 times. A new screen opened. Encrypted channels. Old rebel frequencies. Joe spoke first. "This is Joe Marshall from Mars Colony 12. We have something the Empire wants. Something they fear. And they will come for us. But we will not run anymore." Alina took over. "The Empire lied. They tried to kill a child, to silence the truth. But the truth lives." Lyra spoke last. In her language. A few words. The AI translated. "I am not a queen. I am not a weapon. I am hope." They sent a message across the stars, then shut down the beacon. Outside, the Hope runner drifted onward through the dark, through the quiet, past old satellites, past broken ships, past memory itself. But now, others had heard, and the truth was no longer alone. The signal traveled faster than the light, from dying stars moving through relay towers, abandoned colonies, hidden satellites, and deep space vessels drifting in silence. It reached outer moons where miners worked with frost on their faces. It reached rogue stations where smugglers traded secrets for oxygen. It reached forgotten ships that had not heard a friendly voice in years. And it reached Earth, where powerful people sat in tall glass towers and watched the stars with cold eyes. The message was heard. Joelina and Lyra sat in silence as the ship moved forward through the darkness, each of them thinking about what would come next. The cube rested in the center of the control panel, still glowing, still pulsing, with ancient code that could bring down fleets and stop empires. They had made a choice. Now they had to live with it. Joe watched the radar carefully and kept the ship on a drifting path through asteroid fields and signal voids. Alina scanned transmissions every hour, logging who responded and what they said. Some replies came in quickly. Encrypted voices. "We hear you. We are with you. Where are you going?" Lyra listened but said little. She stayed near the observation deck where the stars looked sharpest and the silence felt safe. She traced constellations with her fingers and sometimes whispered names of stars in her language. Names of home. Names of pain. 2 days passed before the first real reply arrived. It came from a fleet of small human ships near Saturn, each marked with old Earth Navy symbols, scratched and faded, but still proud. The Admiral spoke directly to Joe. "We received your message. We know who she is. Earth Command wants her handed over. But I am not Earth Command." Joe asked what he meant. The Admiral answered slowly. "You are not the only one who sees what this empire really is. You are not the only one who remembers what humanity was supposed to be. We will protect her. We will protect the truth." Joe shared the ship's location, and soon the Hope Runner met the rebel fleet near a quiet moon bathed in red light. The ships welcomed them without scanners, without threats, without chains. The crew stepped aboard carefully. Humans, young and old. Soldiers who had left orders behind. Engineers who had seen too much. People who believed. They listened as Lyra spoke through the AI. She told them about the cube, about her brother, about the power locked inside her blood. She showed them the codes, the systems, the way to bring the empire to its knees. They believed her, but belief was not enough. Earth Command responded the next day. A cold message sent from the core of the solar system. "You are ordered to return the alien fugitive immediately. Failure to comply will be seen as treason against the Earth United Council." The Admiral played the message for the crew. Then he deleted it. Joe watched the faces around him. No one blinked. No one stepped away. Instead, the Admiral stood tall and addressed his fleet. "We will stand with the girl. We will stand with the old soldier. We will stand with the medic who brought them this far. Because if humanity means anything, it means choosing what is right, not what is safe." Alina smiled and touched Lyra's shoulder. "You are not alone anymore." They began to move as one. The rebel fleet sent word to other colonies. Mars, Europa, the asteroid bases, the deep void runners. The signal grew louder. People rose. Some protested in the streets of domed cities, demanding Earth Command release their grip on old war laws. Some refused orders. Pilots turned their ships away from capture routes. Mechanics sabotaged trackers. Medics hid refugees. The Empire responded too. More hunters arrived. More ships cloaked in black moved through the edges of space, searching, scanning, threatening. But now when they came to take, they met resistance. One colony on the edge of Jupiter locked its gates and fired on the Empire's drone before it could scan the port. Another fed false coordinates into the tracking systems, leading the hunters in circles for days. Humanity was waking up. Joe stood on the bridge of the Hope Runner as the rebel fleet prepared for battle. The Admiral had received news. A main Empire cruiser was heading toward them. Large, fast, deadly. They had one chance. Lyra could use the codes. She could send the shutdown signal. But to do it, she had to be close. Close enough for the core systems to feel her voice. The plan was dangerous. But no one said no. The fleet moved into position, hiding behind ice moons and magnetic fields, waiting for the cruiser to appear. When it did, it came like a storm of shadow. Massive, powerful, cloaked in darkness, with weapons that could erase cities. It did not speak. It did not warn. It prepared to fire. The Hope runner moved forward slowly alone into its path. Joe piloted while Alina handled shields. Lyra stood near the core with the cube glowing brighter than ever. As they approached, Lyra placed her hand on the panel and whispered a single phrase. The cube responded. A pulse shot through space, invisible to the eye, but heavy like thunder through the bones. The cruiser paused. Its engines blinked. Its weapons dimmed. Then the lights went out. The ship floated dead in space, silent and still. The rebel fleet surrounded it. No shots were fired. No lives lost. The signal had worked. Lyra collapsed, but she was alive. Joe carried her back to the med bay. Alina followed with tears in her eyes. The message was clear. The Empire could be stopped. The truth could not be buried. And humanity had made its choice. The stars above Saturn burned like frozen fire as the Hope runner drifted beside the silent Empire cruiser, still cold and dead from the signal sent by the girl they once called a traitor. Lyra lay on the medbay bed with soft lights glowing above her, and Alina sitting close checking vitals, while Joe watched through the glass window, hands clenched and jaw tight. The cube rested beside her, humming faintly as if tired from the power it had released and the codes it had poured into the void. The rebel fleet hovered in silence around the cruiser, weapons ready but not needed. They had won this round without a shot, but they all knew the Empire would not stop with one ship. Far above them on Earth, leaders gathered in dark rooms, voices raised and fists slammed on tables as the truth spilled across every channel. The people were awake now. The lie was broken. The signal from Lyra had reached every human world and every outpost, and even those who still feared aliens had begun to ask questions. Who was she? Why had they tried to kill her? What power did she carry? And why did Earth Command obey the Empire like a servant chained to fear? The rebel admiral sent a message to Earth. A calm voice, but sharp like ice. The girl is under our protection. She is not your prisoner. She is not your enemy. She is the reason we still have a choice. The message was not answered. Not right away. Lyra opened her eyes slowly and whispered a name. Joe. He stepped inside and sat beside her, taking her hand carefully like it might break. You did it. You stopped them. You saved lives. Lyra shook her head weakly. More will come. Joe nodded. Yes, but now we are ready. Alina entered and showed them a new report. Ships across multiple systems had turned away from Empire patrols. Some human captains had joined the rebels. Some alien colonies had sent messages of support. Even old enemies had paused. A shift had begun. But then came the next wave. A new fleet appeared on the edge of the solar system, not cloaked, not hidden, but bold and massive. Dozens of Empire warships painted with red and black, with their flagship at the center. It was him, Lyra's brother, the Emperor. He had come not to fight a battle. He had come to finish a war. The rebel fleet sent out warnings. All colonies were placed on high alert. The Hope runner was moved to a hidden moon, where old tunnels led deep into the rock. Joe stayed with Lyra. Alina worked with the engineers to upgrade defenses. The Admiral prepared for one last stand. But something changed. Inside the flagship of the Empire, a signal was sent to Earth. Private coded direct. And Earth Command responded. They would not fight. They would stand down. They would give no aid to the rebels. Their silence was their choice. The Admiral did not flinch. He stood before his crew and spoke clearly. Then we fight without them. Then we remind them who we are. Joe returned to the Hope runner and found Lyra standing weak, but tall, her eyes steady and glowing stronger. She said one word. Enough. She opened the cube again, but this time she did not send a shutdown signal. She sent her voice. A broadcast. Across all bands. Every human channel. Every Empire frequency. She told them who she was. What had been done. Why she ran. And why she returned. She did not ask for a throne. She did not call for blood. She asked for choice. She asked for a future that did not belong to fear. The Empire responded with silence. Then with weapons. The fleet moved fast toward Saturn. The rebel ships rose to meet them. Alina sat in the gunship. Joe and the runner. Lyra and the command bay connected to every signal. Ready. The battle began like thunder over water. Flashes of light, heat, speed, explosions between moons. But then something new appeared. Not a ship, not a drone. Another signal. A fleet of human ships from deep space. Old ships, cargo vessels, medical transports, converted freighters. They carried no heavy weapons, but they blocked the path. And behind them more. Alien vessels. From exiled worlds. From old alliances. They had heard the call. The Empire paused. For the first time they hesitated. Lyra stood before the command screen and opened the cube one last time. She sent the final code. Not to destroy, but to reveal. The Empire's secrets spilled across the stars. War crimes. Slave camps. Hidden weapons. Broken treaties. The truth was now a wave that could not be stopped. The flagship blinked. Its lights dimmed. Then came another signal. From inside the Empire fleet. One of their own captains turned. He powered down weapons. Then another. Then more. Ships stopped firing. Some turned and left. Some opened their gates to refugees. The battle ended not with fire, but with silence. Lyra sat down slowly, breathing hard, eyes closed. Joe held her hand. Alina stood beside them. The Admiral's voice came through the speaker. It is over. The Empire had not fallen in a single moment, but it had cracked, and the light was coming through. Later, on the surface of Saturn's moon, a gathering took place. Not of kings, not of rulers, but of people. Lyra stood before them no longer just a princess, no longer just a fugitive. She was a symbol of what was broken, of what had survived. She looked at them all and spoke softly. I was born to rule, but I choose to serve. Not with fear, not with fire, but with truth. The crowd stood in silence. Then came a sound. One clap, then another, then many. Joe smiled. Alina wiped a tear. The war had not ended, but the world had changed. Lyra now belonged to both, to the stars that made her, and to the people who saved her. Princess of two worlds. Hope for all.